Greetings, Saber fans. Your old pal Meg2 Sith. Another install video. We're going to video the whole install of this saber. This is a very special DV6 saber. This is a Korbanth V1 DV6. It's got a Korbanth Graflex 2.5 rear end, and it's housed in a real special crystal chamber. I'll show you that in a second. But this video is going to entail how we installed this saber. If you want to watch it or how to make a Neopixel blade, I got a video on that. I'll link it in the doobly-doo. But without further ado, we're going to talk about this lightsaber, which is, of course, programmed on Proffie OS 6. But the cool part about this saber is the guts. This chassis, it's a chassis by ShtokV3 Designs, and it's intended for a Graflex, which is why we had to use the Graflex 2.5 rear end on it. But I've got cool stuff happening on it. So number one, I've got dual counter-rotating turbines going in the aft of the chassis, and the crystal chambers on pulse. I've also added some pretty cool dark chasm conduit there in the crystal chamber, which I'll zoom in on that really quick, so hopefully y'all can see that dark chasm conduit going in there. And you know, I've got these programmed as subblades. They'll do a bunch of different things, but the programming is not what this video is about. So without any further ado, let's roll that beautiful beam footage. Okay, so we're working on this DV6, and some of the things I haven't shown you that I've already done before we got to this point in the video is I actually put the whole chassis and the battery and the Neopixel module in there inside the core, and I measured where the end of the Neopixel connector is. So this is how much blade depth we're going to have on this saber from this line to the end. So pretty substantial blade depth. It looks like 2 1/4 inches of blade depth. So it's got really, really good blade depth. And I drilled in and tapped in this 832 retention screw that's going to retain our stock Neopixel module. So it's going to be right above the stock Neopixel module when it's all installed. And how I did that again is, you know, I put the whole chassis inside the core, and then I measured in the blade depth, and then I came up here and measured. Now you're not going to see all these marks on this core because the actual outside of the hilt slides up over this. But then I drew my mark about where the top of the Neopixel connector was, and then I drew the width of the Neopixel connector, and I put the hole dead center. Secondly, I put a retention screw for the chassis. So this is the bottom of the chassis, and it's going to go, it's a tight fit, folks. It's going to go in there just like that. And then this retention screw, which won't be visible when the hilt is screwed on, that retains the chassis and the saber. Sorry, try to get you all in frame here. New camera setup. I'm trying to do a new way and keep the tripods at bay. So this is the retention screw for the chassis, and that is 832 as well. Okay, so now what I'm going to get to doing is I'm going to push this Neopixel module out because it's assembled. So there I took the PCB out of the module, and now I'm going to take the lens off, and we won't need those till later. Before I zoom you guys in, I want to show you some tools that we have. I have my wire cutters, I have my wire strippers, I have, you know, a couple pair of needle nose pliers, I have flux, I have my tip cleaner, which some of that stuff when I'm zoomed in you're not going to see me using, but I am using it. So how I measure my wires is I actually put the chassis in the core here temporarily, and I know that these wires are going to run from our Neopixel module, which there's the retention for the Neopixel module, but let me use the red wire because y'all aren't going to be able to see that black wire against this core. I basically measure from the front of the core to the behind the chassis, because I'm going to lose some of this wiring and twist and routing, so I always leave myself quite a bit of extra. So in reality, you know, I have that much extra out beyond the edge of the hilt. So this is the positive wire for our battery, which we'll do after we finish testing the the Neopixel module that's going in here. But I did measure my red, black, purple, and brown wires because there's going to be 4 wires on this ShtokV connector because we're wiring it in V4. Okay, so here we have our Neopixel connector, and I'm zoomed in, and I'm hoping you guys can see this. I'm going to try and make it so you guys can see what we're doing. So a couple of things is I have to punt off this resistor. I have to pre-tin this data pad, and you know, I'll pre-tin one of the negative pads and also one of the positive pads to receive our wires. So that's what we got to do here. I'm also going to be using one of these cut-off Neopixel plugs to plug in to do the testing of the main blade data as well as the onboard Neopixels with my test rig, with my Prism test rig. We built this on a Megtooth Monday Live, and we're going to use it tonight to test this ShtokV adapter. So this is the manual for the Neopixel connectors, the V3s from ShtokV Custom Works. And this is the wiring diagrams. Now I'm wiring mine in V4, so I have blade and PCB LEDs are independent. And if you'll notice, the resistor is gone. The R1 resistor is not there. The main blade data hooks directly to the center pin. The data for the onboard pixels hooks to data 2. And negative hooks to one of the negatives, and positive hooks to one of the positives. Now, I'm only running one positive line and one negative line off this because I am using 22 gauge wire. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to get rid of this resistor on R1. I'm hoping y'all are still going to see the actual hilt connector up here, and you can see what we're doing. So hopefully y'all can see that R1, which is below data 2. Data 2 is not tinned yet, but we're going to tin that. We're going to remove R1. That's the plan. So the first thing I'm going to do is clean my soldering iron. And I'm going to come in here and I want to get rid of this resistor that's on R1. When you're heating up both sides, you can see I'm going back and forth. What's going to happen is, as I'm pushing on it slightly with the soldering iron, is one of the ends will usually come off. So the D2 pad we're fixing to tin is right here, right above that R1 resistor that we just removed. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to heat up the pad. And I'm going to apply some solder on that pad. And there you go, pretty please. So now that pad is pre-tinned. Now this is 26 gauge Neopixel data. It really doesn't matter what gauge you're using, but I'm using 26 gauge here. And the key is to only strip off as much wire as you need to go to the pad. So on this one, I'm going to be stripping off very, very little because the pad is so tiny. Not like y'all really need to see wire tinning going on. I'm going to put a little bit of fluxers on the end of that thing. We've already twisted the wire, and now we're going to tin it. There we go. So now that wire is tinned. So what I'm going to do now is, I think I'm going to take this thing down to solder onto my tip, and we're going to come in here for the kill. Looked like there was a little piece of wire sticking out there. Actually, I don't like that, and I moved right before it solidified. I want this going down just like that because I want all my wires kind of pointing away. So there is, you guys can see that there's not much strip wire there. That's the biggest mistake a lot of newer guys make, is they strip too much wire and they have a lot of bare wire coming off their connections. And I'm going to hook this to any negative. It doesn't matter because they all have continuity with each other. I'm going to put it right there on that negative pole. And that's going to be it. Let me make sure we got a really good solder joint there. I need a little bit more solder on the tip there. I know you aren't going to be able to see this until I'm done. I guess Justin's putting the pins in these now because it looks like he's using leaded solder from Saber Bay. I have to ask him. That's temporary, but that'll work. Come in here for the kill. There. Pretty happy with that. The red wire is temporary. That's a temporary tack. And the black wire got probably a little bit too much solder on there, but it's still not too bad. So in my helping hands, I have one of these Neopixel test plugs. I get these off the strips when I'm making blades, and I'm trying to get this in frame so you guys can see it. And I have also pre-tinned all the wires that we're connecting here, and I'm just going to do a quick tack here of all these wires onto our test plug, and I'm just going to hand tack them real quick, and I'll hold these wires apart on the test rig. I'm just going to quick tack them together. And now the first wire I think we're going to test is our Neopixel, the onboard Neopixels, which is this brown wire. So I'm going to put it in there. And I am going to need a 1-inch field adapter to test the blade side. But we'll do that later. Alright, so now we have our test plug on. Now I'm going to come in. This is my test rig that I built with an MHS V6 chassis and a prism, and it's got a female Neopixel plug on it. And I'm going to plug into my test rig, and I'm going to have to wake it up out of deep sleep. And then we're going to test these onboard pixels, and I'm going to hold the wires apart so they don't short out. Alright, so we're waking up the test rig, testing the onboard pixels. Here we go. Now I'm going to unplug our test rig, and I'm going to desolder our onboard pixel data, and I'm going to change that to our main blade Neopixel data on our test rig. Alright, back to testing. There's a red. Lockout. And no artifacts. And I'm going to pull the thing out, and you can see the hilt adapter in there, and no artifacts are going. Make sure I'm holding all my lead wires apart here. Be green. Test complete. We're ready to install this thing in the Saber finally. If that seems a little crazy to y'all, that might be. That's how much I test. But we're going to go ahead and take this sucker out of here, and we're ready to put all this together for the hilt. So this is our 7/8 inch adapter, which is going into our Saber. I'm not going to put all that together yet, because what I've got to do is I've got to get the battery in here and wired up. So I think the first thing I'm going to do with our battery is I'm going to cut the negative wire. You should only cut one of these wires at a time. I'm using a pre-wired battery because I don't like soldering wires onto batteries. And I'm going to just cut the negative wire off there. And I'm going to go ahead and strip. Let's go ahead and do this joint I am happy with that. Slide this piece of shrink over our joint, and we'll shrink-a-roo. We'll shrink-a-roo right there. Bada bing, and I know I want to bend it that way, because when it cools, that's how that's going to route down the Saber. So I know we want that to be like that. Cut our red wire. And then I'm going to strip some of that red wire. Again, the custom Saber shop uses 24 gauge, and this is a custom Saber shop battery. I'm going to twist those strands together, twisting them together kind of off screen. Let's give them a little bit of flexors. And we're going to come in here for the kill on that joint. So I'll explain you what I'm doing here in a second. So this is our battery negative and battery positive. Now both those are going to be routing into the chassis like that. And I'm going to take our red wire from the Neopixel connector, and I'm going to join it onto those red wires. So there's going to be a merge here, and it doesn't have to be anything humongous. I want to triple check this solder here, so I think I'm going to try and improve that solder, because I am going to use this positive that we already and I'm happy with that. You know, the red wire is already soldered in there, because that would be a beast to solder that thing together when it's in there. This is a new camera method, y'all. I don't know how well it's going to work out or not. And there we go. So now, put my shrink back on our wire. So I got to do this merge again. So we bring the battery back into the camera range there. I'm going to try to hold that shrink as much as I can. I don't want it getting any heat. And it's hard because I got to hold all these wires out of the way too. Let me get some solder on my iron. Let's try to make that merge happen. It's a happy little merge. Happy little merge. And got solid solder on both sides. So now I'm going to take this shrink-a-roo, and I'm going to pull it up over that merge as good as I can. I'm kind of happy with that. Let's shrink-a-roo. And I'm hoping this positive wire can rest down in there in front of the battery, and then we'll be solid. So now I have to run all my other wires through our wire passage. This should be our Neopixel negative. And then I said that, and then it went through nice and easy. And so there's our auxiliary blade data. So that is everything. So now we're going to try and tighten this in a little bit. I'm hoping that positive wire will tuck in without breaking off. And there we have our Neopixel module and our battery module all lined up. So this much is ready to install into the Saber. So I'm going to drop our Neopixel module, maybe, yep, into the hilt, and make sure it's all tight. And we're going to, so my Neopixel module is now in there, the battery module is in there. Now I'm going to tighten this retention with an Allen key. I'm having to hold that under tension. And then I think we're going to stop here for this video. But my battery and my Neopixel module is installed. And now I'm going to tighten the retention on our Neopixel module. And then looking down in there, 2 1/4 inches of blade depth. So bada bing, that is really the hardest part about this install. But one thing that I haven't shown y'all yet is I have to get my 3 battery wires through here, and I'm going to try to do it with this open channel, which is why I cut that open. So I'm going to feed the green power wire through here and probably the white and yellow wires through here and try to get them out. If I can't get them out of the back side of the chassis, then, or the back side of the core, then I'll have to do something else there. But bada bing, bada boom. Let's cut some switch wires. All right, so I've cut my switch wires. I've got 3 30 gauge wires here. I got green, yellow, and white. And we're going to bring in our core. We're going to see if I can't thread these suckers in through the buttonholes. Well, let's try this. Let's try to push it in from the other direction. See if we can make progress there. Oh yeah, look at there. There's my green wire. It was there. I don't know if y'all can see it down in there. Now can I just grab the green? Oh, looky there. Ha 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 ha. So there's my green wire. I don't need that much sticking out. Now, yellow wire and white wire, we're going to try and get them through the hole the way I was trying to do the green one, because these got a much shorter distance to travel. Have a much higher likelihood of success. Or not. Alright. So let's send our yellow wire in there. Oh, look at that luck. Threaded right in through the back. And we're going to thread this white wire. Another bit of luck. And bada bing, bada boom. So the white wire is the common ground wire for both our switches. Green wire is main activation. Yellow wire is auxiliary. Alright, so this is the switch PCB, and I don't know if this is going to show up. I'm going to try to throw a bunch of light on the subject here, but basically these switch PCBs, they have a copper trace that runs all the way through the bottom of them on these old DV6s. So these 2 poles on those switches are continuous all the way through these 2 poles, and these 2 poles on these switches are continuous through these 2 poles. And that's because of these copper traces that are just here under the surface. So what I do on the ones that I want to be my switch sides, and it doesn't matter, but you know, I'm going to make these my switch sides. So then I'm going to take my Dremel and I'm going to grind this copper away here so I can separate these 2 switches. But I'm going to leave the other side, and the side that I don't grind down is going to be my ground side. So that's the common ground of both switches. And because I've left that copper trace intact, all I got to do is solder one ground wire on here, and both my switches have ground. And then I'll solder my yellow wire on here and my green wire on here, and we're solid. All right, so here we are out on my workbench. and I'm fixing to make some noise here. But basically, I'm just going to take this Dremel with a sanding drum, and I'm going to grind down that trace on this side so we don't have it anymore. I'm wearing safety glasses, by the way. You see that copper underneath there? See that copper shining? We got to get rid of that copper. So I'm getting rid of that copper. I think I'm all the way through it. You can see I got rid of that copper trace. I've got independent switches now. So now that I've removed that copper trace that was here, now this side will be independent of one another. So this will be my main, this is auxiliary, and then the side that I didn't remove the trace on, that's going to be my ground, which you'll see that once we wire this puppy up. All right, so where we left off, we got the wires in through the core. The Neopixel module is in there. The battery's in there. And basically all our wires are now here, and now it looks like a huge mess. These are our 3 switch wires that are coming out of the holes. I have my main switch wire, my auxiliary switch wire, and my common ground to both switches. So I'm just going to strip a very little bit on this main switch. It's 30 gauge. And I'm just going to strip a very, very tiny amount of it. Now it's probably too much. I'll probably cut that off. Come in with some flux. Now I'll come in with some solder. And pre-tin that wire. And now I'm probably going to cut a little bit off of that wire, because I just need very little of that. Now, probably ought to bring in my helping hands here to hold the switch PCB up. Now, remember, our green and yellow wires need to go on the side of the PCB that we've separated. So, I'm going to hook my helping hands here on where we separated the PCB. And then I'm going to bring in our wire. The side that's separated is where our switch is going to go. So now I'm going to bring in my soldering iron. I'm going to get some solder on it. Oh, come on now. The wire's caught up on something on the desk. There, I freed it up. We're going to bring our main switch in here. And try and get some more light on the subject here at hand. So now our main switch is on and we're solid. And the wire is loose in there, so now I'm going to come over here and strip some of our auxiliary switch wire. Just a very ever slight amount of it. Twisting the strands together. Dipping in some flux. And we're going to go ahead and pre-tin our auxiliary switch wire. And I'm going to come in here with our auxiliary switch wire right on this pad on the side we've separated with the Dremel. This is kind of hard because I am working around the helping hands here and trying to keep y'all in frame. And that's good. I'll trim the excess wire there. And then now the last thing we need to do is we're going to take our common ground here. And this is the ground that's common to both switches, that return both switches to ground. And this is going to be soldered to the side of the PCB that we did not separate. That way it provides both switches with ground. And so I'm going to solder it right. Shaky hands. Right there. They must have used non-leaded solder. The control box onto the switch plunger so we can test this installed and make sure we're working out. So how these work out is, and the customer already glued these switches on, so they are what they are. And I'm going to drop. I need to drop that screw down in through there. And then I need to put this control box on top of those. And then this is going to be a tough one because we have to tighten this control box into the hilt. And I can't see if I'm threading, so this is a blind. Oop. There. We have good detent on both of those switches. Now, I'm going to take our switch wires. Here are our switch wires, and I know there are switch wires because there's green, yellow, and white. And I'm going to strip a little bit of each of these wires so we can do some testing. And then I'll bring the multimeter in here and we'll do some testing to make sure that our switches work. So we're going to bring in our multimeter. I'm going to put it in audible continuity mode again. So when you touch the probes, you get, your audible continuity. And I'm going to put alligator clips on here. So now I know when I touch these two together, I get, my audible continuity. So now I'm going to put the white wire, which is our common ground of both switches, in our black lead. And I'm going to put the green wire, which is the lead to our front switch, in the positive lead. And I'm going to depress the front switch. Should hear a tone. We've got tone firing. Now I'm going to put the auxiliary switch I think I just have a bad connection there on the So that's an affirmative test on both switches. And we have tested all the components and all the wires that are leading out of this. So this is a huge mess of wires here. And it's pretty easy to delineate what they are. The green is our main switch lead wire. The yellow is our auxiliary switch lead wire. The white 30 gauge is our common ground of both switches. So those three wires there are all our switch wires. You don't want to tug those out because those solders are fragile. This positive is the positive from our battery, but it's also the positive from the Neopixel connector. This white is the negative from our battery. This purple is our main data for the main blade, and this brown is the data for the onboard pixels on the ShtokV connector, and this black is the main Neopixel negative. So we have two last wires that we're going to need, and the two last wires that we're going to need are for our speaker. And this speaker basically slides down into here like that and sits just like that. So we're going to solder up the wires on this speaker, and then we're going to go ahead and glue in the speaker with E6000 and let it set up. And I may put some hot glue in there to hold the speaker in place while the E6000 sets up. And I'm going to go ahead and strip our speaker wires, which I have cut to length. once I strip them, I'm going to twist the wires, and I'm going to dip them in a little flux and bring in my soldering iron here and tin those wires. I've already twisted the other side. Just make sure we got a good twist on there. And then I'm going to pre-tin this one. Okay, so now both our speaker wires are pre-tinned. Because the speakers are magnetic, usually what I like to do is put them on something magnetic as I'm soldering. It tends to hold the speaker in place while you're doing your soldering. And I'm going to bring in one of our speaker wires, bringing in the speaker wire into the picture here. And we're going to bloop this thing on here as quickly as we can. You don't want to hold that soldering iron onto that contact for too long, because it starts melting the speaker housing and the glue that adheres to the speaker housing. So there we go, solid there. They use a weird solder on these, so when I'm mixing solders, they actually cure slightly differently. I'll put a little bit of fluxers on that. So that's why that joint doesn't look shiny. But you know, they're using silver solder on these posts, and I'm using leaded solder. There we go. Those are good joints. So now we have our speaker wired. So I'm going to squeeze a little bit of E6000 out. I'll try to get some fresh stuff. This is an old tube. I'd buy this stuff by the gallon if I could. I love E6000. It's just a adhesive. And I'm going to take some of this E6000. I'm going to put it down here in our speaker well where the speaker is going to set. I'm not going to put any up top yet because I want to get the speaker in there without gooping it up with E6000. Alright, so there's quite a bit of E6000 down in there. Now, just like we did before, we're going to take our wires and we're going to run them in through our chassis, and we're going to drop our speaker down in there, push it forward into its resting slot, and now the E6000 will be doing its thing. But before that, let's put a little bit up here, up top. So I'm going to put a little bit of E6000 right up here on the face, just a little bit. It doesn't take much of this stuff. Put a little bit of E6000 right up here on the face, and then go ahead and send that speaker home. And probably, I think what I'm going to do is just add a dab of hot glue just to hold the speaker in place, and also maybe to add some stress relief to those wires. And our hot glue gun is warmed up. I'm going to go ahead and just put 2 drops of hot glue where those speaker wires come out. And I normally don't, you know, I'm not a hot glue guy, but there are some applications where it's appropriate, and here it's appropriate. So we've got 2 dabs of hot glue there around the speaker and string everywhere. But that will hold the speaker in place until the E6000 sets up on the front, and that'll allow us to continue the install process on the Saber. And it's starting to get to the point where I'm going to have to reach in there with something and grab it. Yellow for our auxiliary switch. It's a mess of wires, folks. And then our white, which is our universal switch ground. All sneaking in there beside the speaker. I want to try and keep all of our switch wires relatively close together. And there is our mess of wires coming up over the speaker. So Robert, this is why I urge you to use the speaker that's more dependable, because as you can see here, replacing this speaker is going to be very difficult. Now that we have that stuff together, we can put in the base of our chassis into the hilt. And let me make sure the retention's not tightened down on that. Alright, so now we have our chassis on. I'm going to make sure it's centered. This is our chassis base, and these are all our wires. And now that I have that centered, I'm going to go ahead and tighten our retention down for our chassis. That will lock the chassis in, which is that retention screw right there. Now, for the rest of the build, I need to provide some protection because I've assembled our switch module there, and now I have to make sure that we protect it. So I'm going to bring out some painter's tape, because while all this internal stuff, it gets covered by the, I'll show you. You guys can see this DV6 starting to come together. So a lot of this internal stuff, it'll get covered by the Saber head, just like this. So all that, will get covered here that you can see, and it actually goes like this. So while all this stuff is covered that you can see there, this is not. This is an actual part of the finished Saber. So because I'm going to be working with a lot of stuff, I am going to cover our switch section to protect it. Alright, so now I have the first part of our chassis, and now is when we see, can we get all these wires through there? We're going to start around these wires. And that's going to be a lot of wires to fit in there, but I think they're going to go. They did. And we'll tighten all that up here in just a second. So now our wires are routed into that part of the chassis. So now we can begin the chassis assembly. Alright, so to continue on with the build, I've got my box of crystals. These are real quartz crystals, and then I've got my crystal test rig, which we built on a Megtooth Monday Live, and I'm going to test the translucence of this crystal. Try to get it where you guys can see it. That's probably blowing out the screen there, but I wonder if we went on the darker background. That crystal's lighting up really good. Check it in another color, maybe it won't blow out the screen so much. Blue. green. I mean, this is going to be a Darth Vader saber, so it's red, and this crystal really looks kind of siffy. It's got a lot of cracks and stuff in through it, and looks like it's lighting up really good. And I especially like the terminus on it. So I think this is the crystal we're going to use. So this is the crystal we're going to use, so I've got to have to go cut it down because it's going to go in the chamber, and I've already marked it. Really quick, I guess I'll show you guys my test rig, my crystal test rig. We built this on a Meg-Tooth Monday Live. It's just a simple RGB common anode LED, and then we've got 3 switches. And really quick, I'll show you. We can hook a test battery to these red and white wires, and then I have red, green, and blue. And then you can do color mixing. You can do like purple, you can do a yellow, you can do a cyan, or you can do white, which is all 3 depressed. So this is a real cool way to test the light transmissions of crystals. You can see how they transmit light. And the crystal we're going to use on this saber, which is in there, I really like how this crystal transmits light. It's nice. Alright, so now that we've selected the crystal, we're going to have to get the actual crystal holder mounted into the saber. And this one is tough, I know, because last one I built was really tough to get this thing in there. It has to be just right, because the plastic pieces have to line up. And I don't know if it goes like that. It goes like this. I think it goes like that. And then, just like that, we're going to have to glue these in with some E6000. I'll come in here and cut the terminus off. And then it goes flying everywhere on me, right? And so we've got that one part of the crystal chamber in now. Oh, I got it. I'm putting in the pins that hold the chassis together. And these pins actually hold the crystal chamber in. And, we'll have to grind those down a little bit, but be careful not to cut wires here. And now our crystal chamber holder is in, and the crystal, we'll make sure that we don't lose track of our crystal. Our crystal's going to sit in there just like that, and then the illuminated LED will be in behind it. So now we're ready to start assembling the rest of the chassis. So I've got to put this threaded rod in here and thread it in. This is 440 threaded rod, and just trying to get it in there pretty solid. Okay, so the next part of the chamber that comes in is this part. I've got that part in, and then this part comes in like this. And it'll rest right there, just like that. Okay, So I got the crystal cut down. I've got the lower half of the chassis slid forward, and you know, now you can starting to see this come together. Of course, the proffie board's going to go here, and then our LED that's going to light up the crystal chamber is going to go there. We're going to have accent spools that'll go on the outside of the proffie that we're going to make with 2020 Neopixels. And they'll go around there. We've got our recharge port, which we've got a wire to put in here. And, you know, that's it. So, you know, this is the rough mock-up of our chassis, but I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tape all these wires out of our way, because these things are going to be in mondo in our way. And I think we'll wire up the recharge port so that way we can start getting to work on the rest of the Saber. There, I've got the wires kind of taped out of our way. And I think what we're going to work on now is installing the recharge port. And I guess I can get that 440 nut on there too. But the recharge port needs to go in there first before I run my 2020 accent pixels. So I want to go ahead and get the recharge port in there and ready to rock and roll. And that way we can go ahead and charge the battery and make sure the battery's good on here, and I'll be able to test the voltage and all. A recharge port, we're going to be using a Switchcraft recharge port. And zoom in really quick so I can explain this. These recharge ports, they have 3 legs on them, and one of the legs is etched SC, which is going to be this one right here. If you can see the etching SC on there. This is the cutoff leg. This is the negative wire that's going to go to our proffie board. Now, opposite of that, you know, if you go opposite of this SC leg, that's hooked to the center pin, so that means this is positive and this is battery negative. So I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to run a positive wire and our negative wire to the soundboard, but I'm actually going to hook our battery negative direct to this when we plug in the recharge port. So I'm going to be taking the battery negative out of that wire bundle and going ahead and soldering it to this leg. But the battery positive I'm going to merge with the other positive because I've got some other work to do. But I think that's going to be the plan. Alright, so I've got my recharge port with our cutoff leg facing up, the one that's etched, and I'm going to go ahead and cut off some of that leg because, you know, there's too much of it on there. And then what I want to do is I'm going to paint that up with a little bit of flux. And I'm going to come in here with our solder and I'm going to pre-tin that leg. That was way much flux. So let's pre-tin that leg to receive our, this is going to be the proffie board negative. So the main negative wire for the proffie board. So this wire isn't that long. Y'all can't see the whole wire on there, but I'm going to put this down. You can also see my piece of shrink down there that I'm fixing to put on this. So this wire is loose. I've already pre-tinned it. That wire is loose because the next place this wire connects to will be to our proffie board. So I'm going to put our piece of shrink on there, and if you saw that, I cut it on an angle on that so it helps cover up the pad here, and we're going to go shrink-a-roo this sucker up. Alright, we're good there. Now, I'm going to confirm my positive pole, which is just opposite of the Switchcraft pole. I'm going to cut off quite a bit of that tab because we just don't need it. and cut off another piece of heat shrink for our red wire. Now this red wire is going to merge with our other red wire coming down from the hilt, because I had two other red wires that I'm going to have to send in, one to go to the Proffieboard and one to, well actually three more, because one to go to the Proffieboard and one to power our crystal chamber Neopixel, and one to power our accent pixel strings that we're going to put doing the turbine cycle in the rear of the chassis. So I'm going to paint that up with a little bit of fluxers. And I'll come in with some solder here. And pre-tin our positive lug. And then I'm going to put my positive wire in some helping hands, kind of. And we're going to pre-tin a positive wire. Bring it into the picture here. I'm going to pre-tin that positive wire with a fresh coat of solder. And bada bing, we're good there. Now that one's a little bit long, so I'm going to cut that wire a little bit shorter, because you only want as much as exposed wire as wherever your joint's at. So now I'm going to come in here and heat all this up. I move that ever so slightly. There we go. That's a good joint. A couple cold joints there. I had one recure them. And we're going to put that one on just like that. And we're going to go ahead and shrinkaroo that connection. And that's our positive connection to the recharge port. Okay, so I pulled my battery negative wire out of our bundle. And I know our battery negative wire is going to go underneath the Proffieboard and down in here into the recharge port. So I'm going to run our wire into the recharge port hole in the chassis. Maybe. That's what she said, right? And I know that, I don't know, we're going to cut it about yay long. And that should give us enough. We'll put that piece of 22 gauge wire over there. We might be able to use it somewhere down the road, if not in this build, in another build. So I'm going to come here and I'm going to, this is 22 gauge. And I'm going to strip off yay much wire, and I'm going to bring in our flux. I'm going to flux that up a little bit. We're going to go ahead and tin up this wire. That wire's tinned. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut off a little bit of this leg of the negative on the recharge port, just a little bit, leaving enough to solder to. And this may be interesting and fun, and I'm going to have to put my shrinkaroo on here first. I'm going to put it on the battery negative wire, and I really need my helping hands, so I'm going to bring them in, hope they're not blocking the camera. And I'm going to put this, I'm going have to lower this. And I think we're okay there. I know this is kind of cramped quarters here. Oh, hopefully you guys will see something here in a minute. Now I'll be able to test and charge my battery. So my battery can charge while I go into work tonight. After work tonight, we're in the middle of an ice storm here in Wilmington, North Carolina. Live in a subtropical climate, so it's kind of an unusual thing for us to have an ice storm. Now I want to check the length of that wire on our recharge port, and I like it. I'm going to hold that wire in the hemostats because this 22, y'all, heats up, and I don't want to sacrifice my fingers to the gods necessarily on this one. And I'm going to connect in to the recharge port right there, just like that. And then I'm going to slide in our heat shrink over our battery negative on the recharge port, just like that. And we're going to shrink, shrink, shrink-a-roo. And we're going to do our positive merges here in just a minute. So on our positive merge, I'm going to merge the positive that's coming down from the chassis with this positive we just soldered on. And I'm going to do a 26 gauge wire coming out of that that's going to go to the proffie board, and two 30 gauge wires to drive the Neopixel that's going to be lighting up the crystal chamber, and the Neopixel string that's going to be lighting up inside the chamber. So we're going to be doing a 4-wire merge here once I get this in there. So we've now got our recharge port soldered up, and it doesn't yet have power. I think I'm going to do this tonight, and then we'll be at a stopping point. Now my recharge port is connected directly to battery negative now, so we do know that. So there's our recharge port coming through its final install location, and I'm going to put the washer and the nut on the recharge port. And I will be able to sneak my 2020s by there, so I think we're good there. Up the point where the Neopixel's got to go in this chassis. But my hemostats is right there where the Neopixel has to go. So the Neopixel has to go in there to light up the crystal in the crystal chamber. So next, what we have to do to solidify this battery connection is we're going to bring our positive line out of our tape. And this will be good because we'll have all of our positives out of the way. So basically what I'm going to do, just so y'all know, is I'm going to merge these positive wires, but while I'm merging them, I'm also going to add 2 strands of 30 gauge wire that are going to feed our Neopixel accent positive. So I have to find some 30 gauge red wire here. And what I may do is put these merges over to this side so I can eke our Neopixel in here. So what I'm thinking is, I'm going to go ahead and cut this wire about right here to give me some room to work. And I'm going to leave some slack in this wire too. And let me go ahead and strip that. And I'm going to strip quite a bit of this because we're going to have a 30 gauge on this one. I might put the 26 gauge on that one too. I'm going to go ahead and, no, I want the 26 and the 30s together, I think. Yeah. I think I'll put one of the 30s on this side and one of the 30s on the other side. So the 30 that's coming out of this one that's going to join on this one will feed our Neopixel positive that's going to light up the chamber. So this is 30 gauge wire. I'm going to strip quite a bit of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and twist this 30 gauge wire into our main battery and Neopixel positive that's coming out of the battery. And we can go ahead and tin these two together. Alright, so those two wires are tinned together. Now, let me get this wire up here and strip it. And we'll merge our other 30 and our 26 gauge onto this one. So I'm going to strip a lot more than I normally would because we're going to be doing wires here. And I know I'm going to need this 26 gauge wire. This gauge, this is the wire that's going to feed our proffie board. And then I'm going to have to put our last 30 gauge, which is going to feed our Neopixel accent strings. I'm going to strip quite a bit off of it. And I'm also going to twist it into this pair. So we're joining, this is a pretty big merge of wires here, but this is going to be basically our positive junction for all of our positives, but it allows me to take only one wire to the proffie board, which I'll explain all that once we get this solidified here in a minute. It allows me to take only one wire to the proffie board, and we're solid there. Just add a little bit more solder on there, make sure this connection is really good. Okay, now, ooh, that's still hot. Hello. I'm going to need to bring in my helping hands here. And I'm going to hold those wires there. And I wonder if this shrink will go over all three of those. It will. So I'm going to cut a good piece of shrink that should cover this whole joint. I'm going to slit over these two. I'm going to put this one in my helping hands and then make sure y'all are in frame here to see this. Let me zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to try and, looks like we need to go this way. So this is my helping hand here, holding that wire, and then I'm going to bring this other wire into the picture and hopefully merge both of these wires together. They're already pre-tinned, so this should go fairly smoothly, this merge. Yeah. Oop, I'm going to wait for it. Hold down. There we go. So that's a pretty decent merge there of those wires. And now we can take a shrink up over that merge. I don't want any exposed wires. And go ahead and shrink up this merge. Now, with that merge, our recharge port is now active. So I should be able to read battery volts. Now I don't have a kill key in there right now. So number one, this is, let me zoom you guys back out. So on our merge, the thick wire coming out of our wire channel, this is the battery positive and Neopixel positive. So this is connected directly to battery positive. This 30 gauge wire is going to feed our crystal chamber Neopixel. This wire on this side of the chassis is going down to our positive on the recharge port. This wire is a 26 gauge, which is going to feed our proffie. And this 30 gauge wire is going to feed our Neopixel accents that are going to do the spool feature in the back of the chassis. So I'm going to go ahead and put that merge down there where it's going to live. Now I'm going to hook my black wire to this white wire we put coming out of our recharge port that feeds the Proffieboard. I'm going to hook the red wire onto this one. And we have 3.37 volts. Now let me get the kill key out of his kit. And let's plug in the kill key and make sure that we're killing voltage. So, I found the kill key. I keep everything in these plastic DeWalt boxes. Now I'm going to plug in the kill key into the recharge port. You should see that voltage go to 0. And it does go to 0. If I turn the kill key, we're back at 3.37. Turn the kill key, I'm on 0. So I know that we've wired all that correctly. Bada bing. While I've got this piece that I've polished, here's what they look like when they come from Shapeways. You can see how rough it is on the inside. And then here is the polished piece on the outside. You know, it's got some fingerprints and some scratches here from me working. But before I send this off, you know, I'll make sure that I take out those fine scratches and repolish it before it goes back to the customer. But this is what the pieces look like when you get them from Shapeways. And this is what they look like polished. I'm going to go ahead and cut off one of these 35-35 strips. Now on these 35-35 strips, the arrow's going this way on the strips. I'll try and point out the arrows to you. They're very tiny. They're right here in between the pads, but they're pointing this way. So the important thing is you got to have 3 pads before your pixel, you know, in the direction of the arrows. So I'm going to cut this pixel strip right after the pixel and right before the next set of pads. Ugh, that went flying, but it's right there. Alright, so we're ready to pre-tin this Neopixel. Now I did put a positive line on here just so we can test it, because we are going to put this onto our old test rig and make sure that it works. That's way too much solder. That's what happens. There we go. Clean off that soldering tip. And I'm going to come in here. I'm going to tin the data pad. This center one is the data. And that's a good tin there. And then there we go. We're going to test these pixels, because some of these pixels you never know if they're gonna work or not. So we're going to go ahead and test this stripped wire. Now I'm bringing this wire in that I've already strip twisted and pre-tinned, and we're going to put it on this data pad. So in comes our wire, and now we're connected. So here comes our negative wire, which I've already pre-tinned. And there's our white wire soldered on. This is way too heavy of a gauge wire for this, but it'll work for a temporary tack. Alright, and I'm just briefly going to tack these wires. Remember, this is just a temporary tack while I'm testing this Neopixel. You know, normally if you're putting wires together like this, you would heat shrink them, but in this instance I'm just temporarily putting them on this plug so I can test this Neopixel on my test rig. I'm a testing freak. Hope my hand's not in the way of the camera. I'm just tacking that in. And then the last wire is our negative. Alright, so you can see that we're plugged in now into my test rig, and I'm going to go to my first preset on my test rig, and this should be blue. Lock up. Should be red. Lock up on that. So which it is. So we're golden, we're solid. I know this Neopixel works. And we're going to switch to bolts. And by the way, since I last left y'all when we were filming, when we were trying to get it to where you guys can see the voltage. But at any rate, I've got my multimeter set to the 9-volt range. I'm going to attach my positive clip into the red wire that's going to feed our Neopixel crystal chamber. And I'm going to attach the negative lead to our white wire. That's our battery negative. And I'm going to turn the kill key. And so you can see that I'm getting 4 volts through this red wire, which is our positive that's going to feed the crystal chamber. Now I'm going to twist the kill key and turn the battery back off because I don't want a live battery while we're working here. And we're at 0 volts. So I know that red wire has positive running through it. So again, another test, just trying to make sure we don't have failures once we get this thing wired up. So I'm going to cut this wire a little long to join it to our Neopixel. And when I say a little long, it ain't going to be that long. You know, there's plenty of room down in here to cram through that. So it's not like we don't have any room. And I'm going to go ahead and strip this and prepare to join it to our Neopixel. And twist it and tin it. And now we're ready to join to our Neopixel. I'll hold it like that. And it looks like I need to cut a little bit off of that wire because we only want enough wire strip to go to the Neopixel. And I'm going to come here and I'm going to join that red wire onto our Neopixel positive. And that should be it. So our crystal chamber Neopixel is now ready to rock and roll. So I guess basically the big thing I need to do now is twist these wires together, the white and orange, so I know that that's for our crystal chamber data. and crystal chamber Neopixel negative. That way I don't get that white wire confused with, you know, my switch grounds, which are also 30 gauge white. And then, you know, we're going to glue this Neopixel down into where it's going to illuminate the chamber. Again, I'm not a huge hot glue guy, and I am using E6000 to secure this Neopixel down in there, but I'm going to put a little bit of hot goo around that Neopixel just to briefly hold it in while we await that E6000 to set up. That way I don't have to sit here and hold it for 24 hours. The only bad part about E6000 is it takes so long to cure. So I don't want to wait for 24 hours and hold this thing for that long. And it's, you know, really too precarious to get tape or anything down in there to hold it. And, you know, hot glue in this application is okay. So the red wire is already hooked up, and this white and orange pair I'm going to go ahead and bring into our board section. So the next time we use these two wires is when we'll wire up our board. Now I'm going to set that aside. So we almost have all of our install wires in. We have 2 wires remaining to wire. Okay, I have scrapped the idea for 2020 Neopixels in here because what I was trying to do was too complicated, and the 2020s just weren't working out, bending around the curves. They were shorting out. So I'm going to use 35-35 strips, and I'm going to use 2 of them. We're still going to have counter-rotating turbines, which will be pretty cool, and I have done that before in the nylon hilt, but it's just going to be 2 of them, and they're going to be counter-rotating, and you'll see that in behind these windows when we're done with the build. So they're going to reside, you know, in this part of the chassis here, and they'll shine through on these windows when that part of the chassis is installed. So we need to start wiring these up, and the arrows are going this way on this one, and then they'll be going this way on this pixel. So I'm going to run these as sub blades running cycles. So the cycles will be going different directions. There's 9 pixels here on each strip. So on this sub blade, I'm going to be running a color cycle going this way, and on this one we'll have a color cycle going that way, but they'll be timed the same, and they'll be, you know, spinning against each other, as it were. So that gives us this, or not. There we go. Had to get the camera in frame. So I'm going to heat up the pad here, add some solder. That might be a little bit too much, but it'll be okay. Now I've already got the wiring scheme for these. So gray is going to be my data here, and I'm going to bring in our data wire right now on this one. That's a good solder. And I'm going to cut a little bit off of this wire. This is our negative, which is going to go to this side on this strip. Now some of these strips are different, but on this one the negative is on the side of the diode. I have seen some strips where the positive is the diode side, but on this strip negative is the diode side. So that's going to get my white wire. Our red wire for positive. Bada bing. Alright, so now let's go ahead and test this strip. A negative Neopixel plug here, and I've soldered a positive Neopixel plug on these strips. And we're going to plug them in just to test them and make sure they're working. It's booting. Now let's fire it. We got green. We got lock up. And let's clean off my iron. And butter it up with a little bit of solder, and let's come in here and pre-tin these pads here. Basically, I just run the iron on there until the solder takes up the whole pad. You can see the solder flowing to the whole pad, and that's all you really need. There. And here's a piece of 30 gauge scrap I can use for positive. I keep a bunch of scrap wire laying around. There's my positive and negative, and then I don't know, I got a big long piece of scrap blue wire here we can use for data. So I'm going to strip this blue wire. This will be the first Saber I've ever tried subblades on, so I'm pretty excited to give it a whirl. You know, I haven't really been a big proponent of subblades because I've always been worried that if you lose a pixel, you lose that whole string. But, you know, the longer I've had these Neopixel Sabers, I just haven't had pixel loss like I thought I would. You know, I have some 4-year-old Sabers that are still running just fine. The hemostats. Oh man, that's a small wire. I think I can make that work. Oh, let's clean that off. So there is our data connection. That's good. Now we need to go to our positive connection, and the positives are just going to be bridged right there. But since the positives are so close, I can just bridge them, and then it's going to terminate. Y'all can't even see what I'm doing. It's going to terminate right there. I hope y'all were in frame for that. If not, I'll edit it out. But I'm not going back and doing this again. But y'all can kind of see the point. I'm sorry, I didn't check in to make sure that y'all were in focus there. So if I had to edit out what I did there, my apologies that y'all couldn't see it all. And I'm pre-tinning that wire now with some solder. Let's clean off my iron, put a little bit of solder on it, and we're going to come down here for the kill. I'm going to put my hemostats on that wire because it doesn't want to. That's the cool thing about hemostats, is they can hold stuff right where you want it. I know they're probably blocking the camera view, but so there you go. So what I've done is my blue wire is my data wire that goes data to data. I've got a bridge on the positives, which are side by side because the strips are running in opposite directions, and my negative runs around that pixel there. So we've kept the wiring pretty compact. And let's go ahead and plug this into the test rig and see what we got. I don't know how much of this is going to show, but I'm routing these Neopixels into the chassis right now. That packaging tape might not have been a good idea because it's kind of holding me up from getting up through the hole there where I need to get up through. I'll be back with you in a bit. Alright, I've got them routed in. Now let's plug in our test rig and make sure we didn't kill it putting it in the hilt. So we're going to check all of our pixels. It looks like we still have all our pixels. Not to mention all the wires that we ran before. So, but basically the only loose wires we have in here, this is our board negative from the recharge port. This is our board positive from the merge we did before. These two wires we're going to get rid of and merge them. But this is the white and orange from our crystal chamber. This is the white and gray from this accent pixel string. And then you have all of our other wires. The speaker wires, the Neopixel negative, the battery negative. Or no, that white wire is our common ground. Green and yellow switches. Brown is auxiliary data. Purple is main data. And the yellow is the auxiliary switch. So, you know, all our wires that need to go to the Proffieboard now exist in this chassis. And all I need to do is clean up this last merge. And, you know, we're ready to install the soundboard. Basically, the positive wire, we put in the big positive merge for this Neopixel string. We're merging it with the positive wire I had already soldered onto that Neopixel string down here in the hilt. Soldering. Hopefully, you guys will be in a position to see this. Yeah, that'll work. Alright, so that's my last merge. Let me turn on my hot air gun, because once I get this heat shrink around the corner here and up over that merge, we'll have to find a place for this merge to live down inside the hilt. Pretty good with that. Bring the heat gun in here. And we're going to heat shrink that merge. This is a lot of wires, y'all. This is a fairly, you know, complex Saber. And while that's warm, let's shove it down. So my last step before we install is going to be adding some diffusion onto these windows. And, you know, this is what I use. I use this plastic, and y'all that build blades will know where that comes from, but that's what I'm going to use is diffusion here, and I use my heat gun to kind of flatten it out a little bit. So I think I'm going to put some copper mesh in there before I put the plastic over it. So I kind of get a rough outline of it here. So now we're ready to E6000 these puppies up. And then we'll put on our first grate. There's one. I want to make sure that they stay pretty tight on there because we just don't have much clearance. So they need to be pretty tight on there. And then there's that one. That looks really good. Okay. So now that that's done, that's our first stage of diffusion for the windows. So I take my calipers to measure wider than the windows. I'm going to lock them in. And then what I do is I run my cut line so I know about how wide they need to be. E6000, and we're going to pop it on just like that. So we have our diffusion in there. Just like that. Now once these set up, I'm also going to take a sanding drum to them to kind of limit their profile, but kind of show you what they're going to look like, give you a little preview. I can get out my test battery and my Neopixel rig here, and we'll show you kind of a preview of what, you know, that diffusion is going to look like with an LED right behind it. You can see it breaks up the LEDs pretty good. Try to turn off those lights so you can kind of get an idea. See? So it diffuses the light pretty well. This is our RGB test rig that we built on a Megtooth Monday Live. It comes in handy for demonstrating stuff like that and seeing how things are going to look. And there we have our 4 pieces of diffusion, which that's awesome, on our chassis. Alright, so here we are. We're getting ready to install this Proffieboard on this DV6, and I'm going to start by putting my jumper on LED pads 2 and 3. If y'all seen any of my videos, you've seen me do this before. This isn't anything new. And basically what I'm doing is I'm taking resistor tail, and you don't need to use resistor tail, you can just use the wire to bridge the pads, but I like using the resistor tail because it makes sure that I've got good contact on both pads, but my wire is also going to cross both pads too, so it's almost like redundancy to make sure that I'm getting contact with both MOSFETs. And the reason we do this is because the Neopixel amp load is pretty significant, and it needs to be spread across 2 MOSFETs. One MOSFET isn't really enough to take the amp load, so we usually spread this across 2 MOSFETs, and you know, that's why we do this. So I'm going to paint a little bit of flux on there. And now we're going to come in here and solder this other top one, just like that. Now I'm going to flip the board over, and I'm going to solder a pretty solid bridge across both those that my Neopixel negative wire is going to go to. So what's going to happen, and I'll try to get this in view the best I can, is that this the Neopixel negative line, try to get y'all in frame, the Neopixel negative line is going to attach right here. So I'm going to bring in a wire, a red wire, and show you my Neopixel negative line is going to attach right there. Starting at the bottom, data 2, we know we're going to need data 2. That's going to be our crystal chamber data. Is going to be on, or I'm sorry, not our crystal chamber data, but the stock PCB, the onboard pixels, are going to data 2. And then going up the list, next we need data 3. That's going to be our crystal chamber data right here. That's our crystal chamber data. And then our speakers are 2 blue wires. And then we do not have an LED 5 or 6, but we do have a button 2. That's our yellow wire. LED 5 we don't have, but LED 4 is going to be our crystal chamber accent negative wire. LED 3 and 2 is our main pixel LED wire. Button 1 is our green wire from our switches. And then LED 1 is going to be our negative from our crystal chamber Neopixel. And then our battery negative, which this is actually our white wire coming from the recharge port, is going to attach here. Ground is our common grounds from our switches. And then battery positive is that merged 26 gauge single positive wire coming up there. And then next we come down to data 1, which is going to be our main blade, our purple wire. And then data 4 is going to be our data from our spooling accent in the lower portion of the pommel. So that's the plan, that's the scheme, that's what we're going to be doing. Okay, so the first wire we're going to need is this black 22 gauge wire, and this is our main Neopixel data. And you know, the soundboard, and I just cleared a bunch of the wires out of there. So our soundboard is going to sit, and by the way, the SD card is not in the soundboard, but our soundboard is going to sit right here, just like that. So this main Neopixel data, and I'm going to leave some slack because we'll just push that wire, the slack wire, down in there. So when I'm trying to position this wire, I want to leave enough slack, and I know I'm going to have to cut it about right there. So I'm going to go ahead and strip just a little bit off this wire. This is 22 gauge, and I just want enough to reach both those pads, and that should be ample room. And I'm going to put a little bit of flux on there. I'm going to tilt this so we're not spraying solder onto the board. And I'm going to pre-tin that wire. There's a reason that I do this one first, and it's because this one's really hard to get to when you're upside down. And you know, I'll try to zoom you all in here in just a second and show you all what I'm doing. Now I bent that wire ever so slightly, and I'm going to clean my soldering tip. I'm going to add some fresh solder onto it, and we're going to come in here and we're going to melt this in just like that. So we've done the LED 2 and 3 wire, and we did that one because it's hard to get to. So the next one we need is data 2. Now data 2 is going to be our stock pixels. Our stock pixels. So we're going to need the brown wire out of the bundle in the Saber. So we need the stock brown wire for our data, which is going to be right here. And I'm going to run this, you know, in underneath here. This is insane. There's a lot of wires. But I know this is going to be, you know, I know this has to be running on that side of all those wires. And I know that it's going to be way down deep in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take it out the end. And that's the caliber I'm going to use to cut it off until we get more of these wires out of the way, because I know it needs to be relatively close to the end, but I want to leave just enough slack we can tuck it in. And I'm going to cut it off, and then I'm going to bring it up, and I'm going to strip a little bit of this one. This is 30 gauge. This is the data for our ShtokV connector. And I'm going to come in there just like that. I'm going to try to get these other wires out of the way because they're going to go on that side of the soundboard. And our ShtokV connector is going to go to data 3, which, let's double check that. I'm sorry, data 2, which is the second pad up on that side. Data 2 is the second pad up on that side, which is where I've got it coming up through. Oops, you're out of frame. We soldered that one on, so we're solid there. Now the next is going to be, I believe, the data from our crystal chamber. Yep, data 3 from our crystal chamber. And data 3 is going to be speaker, skip 1, data 3. So data 3 from our crystal chamber, this is from that, so it's going to be our orange wire is our data 3. So let me get these out there. And I know I need to get that orange wire out of there. I'm going to put a twist on this so I know that's our, so it's going to, you know, the soundboard's going to go approximately right there. Let me see what you guys are seeing here. I'm sorry. The soundboards go approximately right there. So I'm going to speaker, skip 1, data 3. You know, the soundboard's going to go roughly right there. So I'm going to cut this one about right there. And I'm probably leaving a little bit too much wire on this, but this one's precarious because I need to leave enough slack to shove it in to place. And there's, like I said, there's plenty of room for wires, but I want to be able to get this soundboard out. The bad part about this chassis, it looks cool, but if the speaker ever blows and I have to deinstall all the wires to undo the speaker to get the speaker out of there, I want to have enough slack to be able to go in here and get the soundboard out. So this one is going, just a second, I'll get y'all in frame here. So this is the orange wire here in my connectors, and speaker, skip 1, data 3 is where this one's going. So I'm going to do the Jeff Birch method there and fold it over, and I'm going to get a little bit of flux on the subject there, just a little bit, and let's solder data 3 on there. Hello, shaky hands. And then we'll cut that wire that's bent over. Okay, now we're ready for the speaker wires. And you know, the board's going to be in there about like that. I'm trying not to bend this too much around, but now we need our speaker wires. So I'm going to bring one out at a time because they're way too long. Speaker. Leave enough slack to push all that stuff down. There's one speaker wire. And I'm going to strip it. It's 30 gauge. I'm going to strip enough to get up through the hole. A little bit of fluxers on there. Draw this scrap wire over here in my scrap wire pile. By the way, the kill key is in this Saber. Oops, got some strands that have come loose there. We don't want that. Don't want any loose strands. Let's come in here and grab some solder and pre-tin this wire. And then I'm going to grab that wire with my forceps, and we're going to come in here to the speaker hole, come up through the hole just like that, And oops, the whole wire came up out of the hole. We don't want that. What we want is right like there, how we got it. So I'll try to zoom y'all in here a little bit, and then I'll try and move this where you can see it. And I'll point out with the solder where we're at when we go and hit it. We're right here on this speaker wire. So I'm going to come in here, just clean up the soldering iron, put a little bit of fresh solder on my iron, and come in here for the kill. Bada bing. Now which looks better? The one I used flux on or the one I didn't? Looks like the one I didn't use flux on looks better. It's much brighter and more silvery. But, you know, they're both fine. That's a little stabbed to one of my little trolls that post on my page. So I'm not going to use flux on these pads because there's no need. I use rosin coarse solder. There's no need to use more flux than is already in the solder. So that looks like that's going to be about right for that speaker wire. Put my spare wire over there. And then I'm going to strip some of this one. 30 gauge. Stand by, I'll get you all in frame. I'm just stripping wire. Strip, twist, flux. I'm going to grab it with the forceps. And come up through second speaker hole. I'm going to bend that over. Jeff Birch method, and I'm going to come in here and get y'all in frame. So we're on the second speaker wire hole, pointed out right here. That's where we're going. I'm going to come in from this side. Bada bing. Just like that. Cut off that little scrap piece of wire. Now we don't have LED 6, but we do have auxiliary switch, which is our next wire, which is yellow. This is why, you know, I know some people use the same colored wires for everything, but oh my god, I would be so lost if I did that. And I'm going to leave just enough slack so we can pull this board out if needed. You know, the bad part about this chassis is, let me try to zoom you guys out here. The bad part about this chassis, and I'll show you when we're done installing it, is if you had to replace the speaker, it's kind of a nightmare on this Saber. So I'll typically run the volume on this Saber a lot lower than I would an install where the chassis is just in the back of the speaker's just in the back of a chassis, because, you know, a speaker in the back of the chassis is like a 5-minute fix, where replacing a speaker in this Saber is almost like a whole reinstall, because you have to take all the wires out of the soundboard, take them out of the routing, place in the chamber. You got to take the entire chassis apart again, and it's kind of a nightmare. I'm going to zoom y'all back in. This is our auxiliary switch wire. And try to get y'all in frame here, and I'll point it out with the solder where we're going right here. It's our auxiliary switch wire. And here we go. Bada bing. So our auxiliary switch wire is on. Cut off my Jeff Birch method wire. Now, We don't have LED 5, but we do have LED 4. And LED 4, let's go to screen share. Blade power pin 4 is our negative from our pixels that are on the chamber, or on the rear of the chassis. So I'm going to need my white wire on this gray pair. I need my white wire. And our white wire is going to hook right in there in the LED 4, which already has quite a bit of slack because the way the board is up. But this is 30 gauge. This is our negative wire that's going to our rotating Neopixels that'll be in the rear of the chassis. And how I knew that is this is the one that was paired up with the orange wire that we already ran to data ooh, wait a minute, let me think about that. This one was paired up with the orange wire, which went to data 3. Data 2 was stock connectors. Data 3 was crystal chamber, right? Where do I have, so this one, this long wire goes to my crystal chamber. Where do I have my crystal chamber 2? My crystal chamber, which is 1 Neopixel, goes to blade power pin 1. So this indeed does go to blade power pin 4 off the chamber. So we're right. So this wire we just pre-tinned, which comes from my accent pixels, it's going right up here into blade power pin 4. Oh, I didn't pre-tin it. See, that's why you pre-tin. Did you see all those wires separate like that? See, when I had to go and recheck everything, I had forgotten to tin this wire. And when you don't tin a wire and you send it up through the hole, strands of it will go everywhere. So when you pre-tin it, it tends to hold all the wire strands together. So that doesn't happen. It's like an added safety measure. And I always do a visual inspection on the wire and make sure that there's no strands sticking out. So there's the wire coming up through the hole. Do the Jeff Birch method and bend it over. And stand by, I'll get y'all in the shot here where we're at. So right now we're working on blade 4 pin, which is right here. Which y'all can't see what I'm doing with my mouse, so I guess I got to point it out. This is blade 4 pin, and this is the Neopixel negative for our turbine Neopixels that are in the rear of the chassis. And I'm going to solder it up. Bada bing. And I'm going to cut it off right there. But I'm pulling this green wire out, which this is our main power switch wire, and it's going to go right here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. I might have cut that a little short, but we'll see. I think it'll be all right. I cut that one a little too short. I mean, it's not too short, it'll reach, but it's not going to give me much room to take the soundboard out. So I pre-tin the wire. I'm going to grab it with my forceps, and I'm going to go up through the hole. I'm going to bend it over, and then I'm going to get y'all into the frame here, and I'll point out where I'm at, and then I'll have to cut this seam. So I'm right here on the power switch wire here on the outside. Let me clean that up. Add some new solder to it. Come in here for the kill. I'm happy with that. Okay. Next is going to be blade power pin 1, which is right here, which that's going to be this wire. So this is going to be our crystal chamber negative, and I'm trying to find the best way to route it over to this side. So I'm having to figure out how to route the wires now, but this is going to be blade power pin 1, which this is our actual single Neopixel that goes in the crystal chamber. This is the negative that feeds that. And I'm going to strip this one, and I'm going to twist it. I'm going to tin it. After I get this one on, I'm going to zoom y'all in and get y'all into the picture here. And I'll point out where we're at with the solder right here on this one. And I realize the board's at kind of a weird angle right now, but we're going to come in here and attach blade power pin 1, which is our single Neopixel. Blade power pin 1 is done. Alright, so I'm now at a point where I need my battery negative. And my battery negative is actually this white wire that comes off the recharge port here. And I'm going to try and pull it out through this mass of wires here, so it's where it's supposed to be. And it was pulling on that merge. Okay, so our battery negative, I don't want to give it some slack because this is a 22 gauge wire. I'm going to cut it probably about right there, and then we're going to grab this wire, strip it. It's 22 gauge. This is coming off our recharge port, and I'm going to strip some of that off, twist it, and I'm going to put some fluxers on there, and we're going to pre-tin this wire. I'm going to pre-tin this wire, and again, pre-tinning does two things. Number one, it holds all the strands together, and number two, it preps that wire for being connected onto the pad. So when the solder runs to the pad, it joins with the solder on your pre-tinned wire, and Bob's your auntie, you know. So I'm going to zoom y'all in on this, and then I'll point y'all where we're at with the solder. We're on this pad right here, which is our battery negative. So clean off my iron, pre-tin my iron with a little solder, and then we're going to come in here on our battery negative. Shaky hands. Shaky, shaky hands. There. That combed up nice. So I'm going to trim that little bit of excess and hit that with iron again. And I like that. So right next to our battery negative is our switch ground. So I'm going to zoom you guys back out again as I'm pulling my switch ground out of the hilt. Pulling my switch ground out of where we had it taped in. And I'm going to run our switch ground probably, let me cut that piece of bare wire off there I had for testing. And I'm going to run our switch ground, I think, right through there like that. And we don't want it wrapped around the positive like that. And our positive is the wire we're going to need next. And I want to leave some slack in that, because again, if I got to take this soundboard out to repair the speaker, I want enough slack to make that happen. Now this is 30 gauge. This is the white wire, which is common ground for both our switches. Remember, this is the common that we connected both switches with. And I'm going to pre-tin this wire. And then we're going to solder it onto the Proffieboard board. Just like that. I'll zoom you on a little bit on this one so you can see it. But I'm coming right here to this common switch ground. And it looks like I need a little bit more solder on that negative pad anyway. Now let's go. Bada bing. And then I'm going to cut off that wire we had folded over. Just like that. And that's it. So I'll zoom you all back out. And now is our battery positive, which is this wire right here that comes off our merge. And I think what I'm going to do is, number one, I need to pull it out of here. And I am going to route it Our battery positive is going to go right there. I'll leave enough slack in that. I'm going to cut it about right there. This is 26 gauge because powering the Proffieboard doesn't take as many amps as powering the Neopixel blade. Power flows from negative to positive, so you don't need 22 gauge here because the Proffieboard doesn't take that many amps to power it. Alright, so there's our positive. Now you want to be careful here because this positive pad is right next to the negative pad, right next to the ground. So this is an area that's, you know, prone to shorts on the Proffieboards. So hopefully y'all saw that solder. That was positive. Now, our last two are data. And I'm going to, hopefully there's enough slack in the Proffieboard I can pull it out there. See, that's why I wanted to leave a bunch of slack on those wires, so I have to be able to pull that Proffieboard out. Let's go to Windows Share, and let's go and look at our diagram. So data 1 is the third one, and data 4 is the last one. So our purple wire is going to the third one up, and then our gray wire goes to the last one up. So we need our purple wire next. This is our main Neopixel data for the main blade, and it's going to data 1. So this is our main data. I've got it routed. It goes to the third one up. I'm going to leave enough slack because this one has to get pushed back in. So I want to definitely make sure I'm leaving it enough slack to lift up and push in on this main Neopixel data. And this is 26 gauge because I use 26 gauge for my main Neopixel data. And I'm going to twist. And I'm going to tin this sucker. Just like that. And I'm going to grab it. And I'm going to send it up through that third hole, which is pre-resisted. And I'm going to try and cut some of that wire off because I have too much strip there. Again, we're right here. Bada bang, there's our main Neopixel data soldered on. Now our last wire for the install is this Neopixel data gray, which I'm going to try and push it through the middle here to get it over, and I want to route it outside of inside of this purple wire like that. And this is data 4. This is the data for our accent pixels, and I want to leave enough slack on it to push it through the chassis when I put the soundboard into place. This is 30. This is our gray, which is our Neopixel data for the turbines, the counter-rotating turbines in the back of the chassis. I'm going to pre-tin that wire. Now this Saber's got a lot going on, a lot more than, you know, your average Saber. This Saber has several accent LEDs on it. There's 16 accent pixels in the ShtokV connector, one lighting up the chamber, that's 17, and 18 accent Neopixels here. So 18 and 17 is what, 35 accent Neopixels going on this Saber. And it has 4 different blades. Or is it 5? 5 blades, because I'm running these 2 accent strips in sub blades. So it definitely has a lot going on. So basically that's it. The install is done. I'm going to put the Proffieboard into position on this thing, and there, the board snapped into position. So I can, you know, those wires coming out of the chassis there, I'll probably do something to to tidy them up. But these are the wires for our accent pixel. Our accent pixels are going to bend over the soundboard like that. They're insulated. I do have to secure the soundboard in, but let's go ahead and put the SD card in this puppy. And let's throw the spurs to it. Oh yeah. So our crystal chamber's pulsing like I programmed it. Those are doing a reverse cycle like I wanted. Let's check our power switch. Zoom y'all out. And the stock connector is working. Motion gestures are working. Should see that spool slow down. So we've got counter rotating spool going on. I don't know if y'all be able to see the counter rotation down there better or not. I think eventually I'm going to put marble in here too on one of the presets, but that worked out like I wanted it. So one proffie board installed. Next we got to finish assembling this Saber. Thank you everybody for watching as usual. I really appreciate y'all tuning in on my channel. And as always,